You won't break till I die. You and me do not vibe. Bitch, I see through all them lies. I'm the Tupac of my city. All eyes on me, no biggie. When they rely on me, I get it. Bring it. Payback's been not missing. Boy, I'm 10 plus to win it. That's 10 toes in the field.
We acknowledge the First Nations people as the traditional owners and sovereign custodians of the land on which we work and live. We recognise their continuing connection to country and their respective nations across this continent, and pay our respects to their elders past and present. We also celebrate the unique and inspiring creativity and songlines of the world's oldest living culture, and give thanks for the immeasurable influence First Nations people continue to have over the music and art we all enjoy.
Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, the Yagara and Turrbal people. Sovereignty was never ceded. I'm journalist Jim Malo, and I'm hosting a cultural change roundtable discussion for ARIA Week. I've got three people with me around the table today who I can't wait to have this discussion with. And we have Sian Van Der Muelen, who is the director of Point Blank Group and also known as Miss Blanks. Uda Widanapathirana, who is an artist manager from Sukuya. And Alethea Beeston, who is the lead artistic director from Digi Youth Arts. How do you think the music industry has changed over the past 12 months? Where are we at now, and how have you all reacted with that? I think I might start with you first, Sian.
How has it changed? Has it changed? I'm really mindful that over the past 12 months, the music industry, entertainment industry at large, creative industry at large has gone through a lot. The pandemic, which has resulted in a loss of jobs, people changing careers. There's now a skills shortage, and people are just trying to make ends meet, and those at the coalface are suffering the most. Music is a national business, so the impact from borders and all the rest of it has meant, artists haven't been able to tour, those in the independent sector haven't been able to access government support, and if they have, it's been really minimal. So to that end, a lot has happened. I mean, if we're talking specifically on cultural change across our music industry, I can't ignore the fact that some horrendous and egregious moments have taken place as a result of those things coming to surface. I think conversations around sexual assault in the workplace, violence and harm in the workplace are happening more now than ever before. What that change looks like structurally within these institutions and frameworks, from a policy end to a cultural and social and environmental ends. I don't work in these harmful institutions and spaces. I'm very lucky to not work in them. But, it doesn't just happen now. It's happening across our industry, and not just our industry, other industries as well. These aren't isolated events, and we've seen that historically. But what is changing? I'm hopeful that change is coming. What that looks like, I'm not too sure just yet. I guess we'll wait and see how it unfolds. But I'm also really mindful that it has been Indigenous, Black and Brown people, queer people on the front line of this work, and of championing this work and advocating for change for the longest time, well beyond the past 12 to 18 months.
Yeah, so Alethea, how has the past 12 months been for you, and how has your company and your artists, how have they sort of gone through it?
Firstly, we are continuing on still from the work of those who've gone before us, and I'd like to acknowledge the Black fellas who have been doing this work long before I ever did, but also long before platforms like this exist. And I think that's probably the biggest change, is that platforms like this exist more and more. And so for Digi Youth Arts and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander young people that work there, I guess the change that we've seen is that we no longer want to participate unwillingly, because we were only unwillingly participating in it, in the harmful Western institutions. And we would like to rebuild our own platforms for our music, because this particular pandemic, and there's been quite a few on these lands since the first boat rocked up, has kind of shown that music will survive. Like, music has survived restrictions before, just to specific groups of people. And so we've sort of looked at the space that the music sector is in, and more the industry as a construct versus the individuals, because we feel the same, I guess, empathy for those who are really struggling because of the impact of COVID. But I think the construct of the industry needs to like adapt and move and become more artist-centric than it perhaps is, in a way that is much more community caring, so that they can get through the issues. So we kind of feel like it's all going to come down, and we're just going to focus on the building and the rebuilding of what our elders and our community want us to build, which is why we did Blaksound, and we just created a completely Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander space and focused on that. And I think that for us has been the biggest change, is kind of turning our back to those institutions and just focusing on rebuilding.
Awesome. Might come back to you on that.
Yeah.
So, how about you, Uda? How have
the last 12 months have been 12 to 18 months have been very difficult, but I think in the concept of, let's say, the lack of opportunities that emerging artists, especially emerging artists of color or queer artists or literally any minority group, I think when the pandemic first came across, I was like, well, like, everything was already against us already, you know? Like literally, and the thing is, we're going to be getting the same types of, like, pushback, you know? When there wasn't a pandemic, they were just like, oh, it's very competitive, or, like, you know, it's a hard market out there, we need to be mindful of release times, or they're doing the same thing. And when there is a pandemic, it's just like, well, there's no shows on or anything like that. So we're getting the same, like, either way, we're getting the same pushback. So I think the strategy that I sort of adopted was always going to be shared, you know. And yes, it is, you know, objectively harder in terms of, like, the lack of live shows and everything like that. But there was always no money. There was always no opportunities and everything like that. There was always, you know, people are going to be like, oh, people aren't signing artists, they're not doing this, you know, because of, you know, whether it's due to a pandemic, whether it's due to, you know, whatever the market might like us for, if that makes any sense. Yeah, like, you know, all of those obstacles still existed, if that makes any sense. And I think as we're coming out of the pandemic, I guess, those sort of, you know, I think it's important that we don't, you know, forget the obstacles, you know, just because it's really easy for a lot of people in the industry to be like, we were all in this together and we all faced the same hurdle. But it's just like, no, well, it actually really disproportionately affected people of color and First Nations artists and queer artists and everything like that. What else? Not all the artists, you know, yes, there were some very successful artists throughout the pandemic, but they might have had access to capital, access to, you know, not just things that revolve around live shows, you know, things like streaming, or be able to develop really cutting-edge content that kept them afloat and viable, which I think is something that a lot of broadly marginalized artists don't have access to, and everything like that. So I think it's just important, especially now, that we don't, you know, the last 18 months, yes, sucked and it was a huge impact on the music industry, but not all of that experience was the same.
Okay. What are some of the ways your artists manage to sort of innovate, or to... is that the wrong word to use?
No, I mean, I would say innovate. I think what we did from the get-go was, well, obviously there's no shows or anything like that, but as soon as the pandemic hit, we were sort of just like, well, a lot of people in music are probably not going to be able to work on anything, or they're probably going to be out of money, or not in this territory specifically, but specifically overseas, and we might actually have the opportunity to reach some people overseas to work with us that we didn't have beforehand. You know, maybe usually they would be saturated with artists in their own home territories, or bigger artists from here and everything like that. But kind of in that lack of morale, we were just like, there's an opportunity here. We need to get in touch with people. We need to start networking now and remind people that, hey, we know what you did. We know, you know, we're aware of your work. We still respect you. We still love you. We know it's a hard time, and we still want to work with you. So I think in those gaps, we started networking, started talking to other people. And I think, like, with our artists, and specifically the number of international collaborations that we've done, that probably wouldn't have happened if, you know, without the pandemic and everything like that. The need for those things to happen happened much more easier and everything like that. So, yeah.
Awesome. When it comes to working in what is probably a very white industry, what do you think the benefits are, Alethea, to sort of taking a more culturally, culturally different way of approaching the music industry and doing business?
Everyone will get looked after and cared for. Like, everyone will be treated as a community member who you look after, and you look after every single person. So I know we've kind of discussed that in, I guess, I can only speak to my own experiences, but in the context that I have learnt from my community, which specifically I'm an Aboriginal person through Kabi Kabi Wiradjuri ancestry. But if we are to look after country and we'll look after the whole community, then we're looking after everyone. And that includes the intersex of the community who might not be representative in my identity, because otherwise you're not actually looking after everyone. Yeah. And so I think there has actually been research that's done that if you get your Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander or your Indigenous, I want to say more than policy, like actions in your institutions right or fluid enough to be working and functioning, what people have found is that other parts of the business and other parts of the workplace have actually fallen into place because you're coming at it from this holistic lens, which is not completely, which is not exclusive to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. It's found in different cultures and different groups all around the world. But I think it's also just more interesting and less beige. Like, I don't know. There's also the interesting factor. Like, we know where music has come from, and we don't even really know where music's come from, because I don't think that it's come out of a really colonized place, and where there's, in First Nations cultures and Black cultures, and the way the colony has impacted these spaces, and also the music that exists on lands everywhere. So I just think it's more interesting, and it's actually genuinely going to look after artists, because one of the things that we often remind ourselves at Digi Youth Arts is that for longer than not on these lands, artists have been given resources. Like, the past 200 and however many years, 52 years, isn't long in the history of art and music making in this country. And prior to that, artists were given resources and were cared for.
And I think to that point as well, I mean, to piggyback off the same question, I've always, I guess, when we work with our clients, whether it be government or private sector, a lot of the time it's been about approaching the consultancy from if some of the most overlooked people can be prioritized, seen and held in this space, then those that are already the most prioritized will already fall into that. So I think, 100%, it all aligns.
Okay. I also wanted to ask you another question, piggybacking off her answer as well. You sort of mentioned that it has been very traumatic in these past 12 months with all the revelations that were coming out from, different music companies and all sorts of things. And I wanted to know what you thought about, how these existing structures may sort of fail to care for people. A lot of them have committed to changing their culture. So, do you think that they are committed? And if they're not, what can they do to show some more commitment?
Addressing more specifically those revelations, I think when we talk about harm as this kind of broad, let's say, concept, for lack of better words, my mind isn't always jumping to the most egregious. Nowadays, most people can't even communicate with each other, can't even have generative conflicts, basic conversations with people. So when I think about organizations' commitment to, eradicating, harm and violence and this, that, the other, I'm also really mindful that people are inherently flawed. There's no good and bad people. People will just do good and bad things at different times of their life, intentionally or not. Instead of rushing into the moments where it's the most egregious forms of harm, I'm more interested in approaching, at least in my line of work, I'm more interested, and also a step further, I find it more effective by being able to jump in and kind of respond to when things are kind of just kicking off. Because I feel like we can prevent a lot of this, this harm collectively, because I think, to jump off the back of what Alethea had mentioned, it is an ecosystem. We all contribute to it. We all take from it. So I think also to that point, I think, even when we talk about our response to harm, I think a lot of the times because of the colony that, our feet are settled on, I'm really mindful that it's always through this like punitive action lens. It's like, you look at cancel culture, even my own thoughts have progressed over the years when it comes to like the topic of cancel culture, ultimately removing someone from community, giving them no space for like rehabilitation, the function to learn, grow, develop, etc., etc. Where now I approach my response to harm a bit differently than maybe I would have a few years ago. Now it's about, transformative justice. It's about really addressing the harm at the root, addressing the root of the harm, and seeing, exactly what has transpired, what needs to happen collectively within our community to address some of this. But in saying that, I'm also mindful that not everyone's ready for that work. Yeah. So if I can't imagine doing this work with you, if I can't dream with you, then that's not for me. Mm-hmm. And I think that also can apply and has to apply when it comes to like working with, big companies, organizations, and institutions. If I can imagine us doing this important work together, even if it is me hand-holding you through it, then great. But if not, then that's not my work to be done. So yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Add on to that, I think a big part of it as well is, so with organizations, institutions, or companies, like, they kind of need to pick whether they want to work like an organization or like a family business. Like, you can't have literally, you can't have one of the two.
Shady.
It's not shady, but like when you look at the music industry, everything is just like, not even like, fair enough if it was run like a mom and dad like fish and chip shop or something like that. Because at least there's love, like, someone steals from the kitty and then like, they're grounded for 2 weeks and then it's just, we love you, come back, son. Come back, work at the fish and chip, and there's love there, But like, you look at like most of these big organizations and they're like half, 1 foot in the mom and dad fish and chip shop and the other foot in an organization. They have like the cult of personalities. They have this whole like, I found you, I raised you type mentality in terms of the employees and corporate culture, but then they don't also have that on the how they bring people back in or how they discuss issues with them or anything like that. And they have these like flimsy like policies that don't really, do anything to address anything. So it's either like, if you're a small business or if you're like a small company, then operate like a family business. No harm in that. It's not a bad thing, Or if you're an organization, be professional, be an organization, and make sure they come through.
To play devil's advocate, do you feel like once you get to a point you can't keep those original values
absolutely
in place?
Absolutely. And I think also like maybe a part of it is like some of these companies have existed for many decades, and when they started they were very small, and they want to keep that mentality as they grow and everything like that. And a part of it can remain, but I think the almost not having a refresh button is what is allowing those I think it's very peculiar in music that there is such cults of personalities around specific people, if that makes any sense, Like, the entire industry can be reduced to maybe 6 people in this country, if that makes any sense, right? And it's the same internationally.
Me.
And you can argue the same about like any business, if that makes any sense. But also, like, I think specifically in music, like, I think that whole idea of just like, I birthed you, I found you, I raised you, like, what's it called? Paternalism, Yes. It really exists, and I think that's where a lot of the toxicity really comes from, that idea of loyalty, that idea of like, you, not dogged us, but I guess you dogged us and went and moved somewhere else. Dogged us. Et cetera. But, there's a lot of like, territory paternalism in terms of like how people treat other people's growth, and that's not just limited to artists, also limited to people and workers in the industry.
That's really interesting because like especially coming to that cult of personality thing, I mean, I was going to say, like, it kind of sounds like just the C word, you know, like capitalism. like
I was thinking another C word.
and I wonder then, and particularly with paternalism, so I wonder then if it's, you know, they use these already existing structures and also the, I guess, the precariousness of working in the entertainment industry where the product you create is not necessarily a tangible, you know, it's not a tangible, easily sellable product. You know, like you can't say, if you let me make music for this amount of time, I'm going to make you this much money. It's not always that cut and dry. So I wonder then if they use that position of power to, I guess, exploit people. So, I mean, is there anyone who has any thoughts on that? Have you thought people in your businesses have been exploited through this way? Or
I don't think it's like, I think the exploitation is this thing that's directly related to the inherent capitalistic nature of music. I think it is very much just like, well, I grew up like this, so you grew up like this as well. Like, and that is what is fed through, you know, whether it's from the people that have been in the industry for 40 years and then the people that, you know, they raised that have existed for the last 30 years, etc. And that's sort of just like, you know, it's sort of that idea of like, imagine if you're like a touring promoter or a club promoter and you're not a real touring promoter unless you've lost like $20,000 or something like that. You know, or you don't know what it feels like, or you don't know the value of money unless you've lost a certain amount of money. And then when you think about, like, not that that's a statement that's commonly said, but when you think about something like that, that's only like a luxury that's available to a certain the ability to throw, like, I don't know, 10, 20K on like some act that you're bringing from overseas and just be like, oh yeah, I lost that, now I know. Now people will respect me, if that makes any sense, you know? And but it's such a privilege, you know? It's such a privilege, and it kind of like, if you don't, you know, if you haven't almost worn that, then you, like, I don't know, cut yourself off. Not cut yourself off, but you're not enabled to go into other positions and everything like that. So, I don't know, I think it is very much just like passed down because it's that idea of just like, I intend for free, I did all this stuff on the side, etc., etc. It's built in to every generation, kind of above, not even above, still this generation, but like, how do we like, also like, you know, that almost links into like, how do we separate the work of music workers into work, you know? Yes, this is a lifeblood and, you know, we do what we love and everything like that, but it does take up your entire life, you know? How do we just make it work? And I think that's probably like the question to ask in terms of like detangling that paternalism.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, why don't we do that then? No, seriously. So then how do we start to detangle it? I mean, do you have any thoughts, particularly coming from a, you know, looking at a black sort of approach to,
I guess.
Is it a fresh perspective?
Yeah, I think the way I do it as someone who kind of now chooses to work in some white spaces is they're my work, and I've like got to start calling that my work. Whereas at Digi Youth Arts, we've kind of gone, well, we don't know how to quite dismantle this whole capitalism thing, and apparently we're going to spend most of our time working together. Why not really like these people in like a community family sense? But we don't have enough resources to do that, so that's why we still have to do this other kind of
siphon off from one column.
Yeah, this other work. We're kind of exploring this notion of, well, if we are going to do this much, we're going to have to spend this much time doing this work. Why can't it be like this? Because that just makes sense. But yeah, it's also so commonly accepted just across all of the arts. Like, I also work in like the theatre and in just like multi-arts festivals, and just the expectations of what you have to give up from your life from everyone is just so ingrained that I have recently had a chat with someone where they actually looked at their festival program and went, what are we trying to achieve? And then realised they could achieve it doing something that wasn't that hectic and actually just spread out the program, but in a way that wasn't like just making it more hectic over a year. It was actually doing that work and finding a different model to do that work. So, and one of the things that I think struck me in that conversation was being ready for that to fail. Like, because the only way we can find different models and to figure out how to make some things just work and not have everything consume our lives, or not, you know, have the expectation when I was working on Blaksound that you went to bed at 3 a.m. and then you got up at 5 a.m. to go pick someone up, and that was just work for that week, which is fine. That was what I signed up to knowing to. It's not fine. Sorry. It's not fine. I can see myself like, it's fine. I really left that job. We're good.
I'm in shock.
But that was like it wasn't everything, that was one of the things. Like I had to go pick up First Nations mob from the airport, and that was just your work week. And I was like, that is quite wild that's just the expectation. So I think, these conversations are a great way to start.
Yeah. Any thoughts? Like, do you have any places you would like to see people start when it comes to actually trying to get serious about making a cultural change?
Off the back of what Uda and Alethea said, I think for me, I think the past, I don't know how many months it's been, but like since the pandemic, I've had to really I think it's kind of forced everyone to take a step back and be like, oh, so we were working in pretty poor conditions before. Like, everything was like time sensitive, high pressure, like it really was a pressure cooker to like over-deliver, over-perform. And I think that's, coming from other industries where that was kind of just normalized. It was, like you mentioned, just part of your work week. I think COVID in a weird way has been a blessing for me. And I know definitely for others as well, in the sense that it's definitely like painted a very clear picture of like, how things were before and maybe how they just weren't okay. And now stepping into this like COVID normal, like what does that really look like, and how can we take like the good lessons from the forced break, I guess, maybe break?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think what is that? So many people. I mean, look at how many people have walked away from this industry because they're just like, wow, I was doing so much work. Yeah, that's smart. Jokes. But like, and they were just like doing so much work, so underpaid, etc., etc. Like, I hope that like, I don't know, the way that we budget, the way that like we not even just program things, but plan things and everything like that. I don't know, have more contingency, have more consideration to, to the reflections that as an industry we've had about being burnt out, about like, why is this time sensitive? Is someone going to die? Like, no. Like, we literally live in like we work in this industry which is meant to be really fun, meant to be really engaging. It's supposedly fun, and like, I don't know why I have so many grey hairs. They work in music, like, not that old. It makes me
make good art when they suffer.
Apparently. But the thing is, I'm not an artist. I'm a manager. Someone else get grey hairs, not me. Like, and I hope that we can take some of those learnings, and I think like the sort of just like compassion that we gave each other into future situations, if that makes any sense. Because since and just that mindfulness and understanding of just like, this thing, if this thing isn't that urgent, this thing isn't that important, it's okay if things are running a bit late, if that makes any sense. It's okay. All these like sort of exceptions that we gave ourselves should continue because like that's the minimum for us to look after ourselves, if that makes any sense.
I feel like there's a lot of off the back of this.
Is that what we want? That's how it works.
I've been thinking a lot about like, with that in mind, the idea of like going beyond self-care, what does self-preservation look like? And I think a lot about how that's so closely connected to like, even like Black Lives Matter, Trans Lives Matter, and so on and so forth. But especially like working in some of these like spaces where the idea of, diversity and representation, like all that is really nice, but like once we're in there, how can we like truly belong? And especially off the back of COVID, with some of our clients, even just like having those conversations, like, okay, cool, it's really nice to have a seat at the table now what? And also how are you going to extend that like care to me to ensure that I can, have rest, have meetings that are on my time zone, not yours, and all the rest of it. Little things, but like I feel like it plays such an important part in that self-preservation, Been thinking a lot about the power of sleep as well. That's a whole nother topic you're not ready for.
And I think it's the actual deep change work, because I know like I think I was invited to like some mental health webinar at one of the places I worked at, and I was like, I'd actually just like everyone to stop being racist. Like, my mental health.
Yeah, it would be
just
lovely.
accept that ingrained race, and this is me, like with privileges, like, and how difficult these workplaces are, like, because you're not told that you belong there because they've been set up for you not to belong there, and so the workplaces can be quite violent.
Yep.
When you're in these spaces that you're not meant to. And so it's like self-care in these and in this diversity and belonging kind of era or whatever's going on has been like, well, we'll get, this happening and this happening. And I'm like, can you do that alongside this actual structural change? Because that's going to help a whole bunch of folks actually exist in these spaces in a way that, means you don't end up sleep deprived because you haven't gone through some kind of trauma trigger that day. And I know you can't control everything, but yeah, I think it's really important, and I've been thinking a lot more about that, which is probably why I stepped out of, not working internally in Western spaces and always kind of working on the outside. So it's like, well, while you sort that out, I'll be over here.
I think it's also because, like, I don't know who said it to me, but I remember a few years back someone being like, what are safe spaces? No one can guarantee your safety. And as soon as someone said that to me, I was like, oh my God, mind blown.
I had an uncle say that. Like,
Yeah.
Like, why are you working at Big Sound? I'm like, oh, I've apparently got to make it a safe space for Indigenous people. He's like, possible job. It's not safe for anyone. And I was like, okay.
That's so true. Is any space safe for Indigenous people in so-called Australia, right? Like,
No.
Pushed out of the land and everything.
We can, we get to create bubbles, I guess, of safety. It's kind of when I'm in, like, say, creative development, it's a full blackfella cast and crew making a theatre show. We might be inside a Western theatre, but there's this bubble, and like that's kind of what gets you through. And yeah, juxtapositioning the music industry with Black joy has been a must.
Well, I mean, so what I'm sort of getting from this is that, like, clearly no safe spaces, no guaranteed safe space, and like the music industry itself seems like it is a very unhealthy place for a lot of people. I mean, now that we have a seat at the table, do we even want it?
So how I approach it is like, one, who's going to do that change for me, but also I'm mindful that whilst the current conditions are unjust, I know, and again, I can only speak to my own experience, I'm really mindful that I'm equipped with the experience, the language, and also the trust of community to navigate these spaces with community front and center, or front of mind, to enter these spaces, but ultimately knowing that these spaces aren't always, well, point blank period, these spaces aren't going to be my oppressor and my savior. So, like, really interrogating the space and also myself about, okay, if I want this change to happen and to come, what is my contribution to this conversation and this work going to look like? And again, for me personally, it really goes down to, or it comes down to, can I imagine doing this work with you? Is there space there? We definitely need to be creating our own spaces and platforms outside of these institutions and frameworks. But also, I know out of survival, it has meant so much to so many minority groups to be able to access these spaces or these pathways to access space, if that makes sense. But ultimately, long term, want to have my own spaces that can operate autonomously. And I think that's a huge part of even like when we talk about legacy building, especially within community, being able to like create these spaces that can operate autonomously for community by community, that isn't dictated and policed by any one person, any one group, but especially not dictated and policed by these people over here, for lack of better words.
Suppose a pale, stale male thing.
Hey, you said it.
It's cool. I'll take it. So do you think some of the steps that your artists have taken recently in collaborating outside of like Australia in because like I know the Australian music scene tends to be very parochial. It's, you know, it's, everyone's like, it's like a big deal when you break out. Like the Kid Laroi, right? He's done a massive job of breaking out of Australia. You know, do you think by doing that it sort of gives you at least a toehold and a foothold to sort of shaking the foundations of the institution?
Absolutely, because me and Sean were actually discussing this on Saturday, but like for a lot of people of color, lots of the, you know, First Nations artists, I imagine, like and you know, queer artists, a lot of their audiences are not here. They're not here, and like the people that the communities that are gonna be able to relate more are probably going to be overseas. So also saying what Sean said in terms of your oppressor can't be your savior, like that's not gonna happen here. So I think in terms of creating own spaces and everything like that, even going beyond communities, that every individual artist, whatever, like the, you know, whatever they stand for, should be able to create their spaces and everything like that. And every artist, in a way, has done that throughout history. Like, you know, they've been given the means to create their own communities, the audiences, fan bases, you know, different terms and everything like that. And it's more so within, you know, these constructs, people from you know, minority backgrounds don't necessarily have the tools to do that. And not just the tools, like, you know, maybe they have gone to that level, but whoever's reaping the benefits of it might not necessarily be them. So, you know, I think it's important that artists have the ability to have the tools to create their communities. And, you know, also just going specifically to things like content, if that makes any sense. Like, as we've seen, a lot of artists, not just from here, but worldwide, have successfully managed to break in the last 18 months because of sheer content that they're putting out, not just music, but, you know, really well-edited videos on TikTok and everything like that. All of these things require a lot of capital, a lot of planning, and these things aren't necessarily related to like label deals or publishing deals. You know, who's funding this stuff? You know, you can't. You know, you don't get money to create. I mean, like maybe if you have a platform, but in terms of developing a platform to make content, if that makes any sense, that's not. You know, labels aren't making money off that. Publishers aren't making. They reap the benefits of it, if that makes any sense. But unless you are somewhat in a privileged position to be like, okay, I'm going to spend like 7 hours every day on making content, whether it's on YouTube or TikTok or something like that, you know, it's really hard, you know? So I think it's really important that, you know, especially, you know, that concept of like, we have a seat at the table, what do we do now, right? Platforms are not structures, if that makes any sense. So, like, we might be getting added on rotation, we might be getting playlisting and everything like that, but what's actually going to sustain that, right? And what sustains that is the tools, the infrastructure, so the ability to change that critical mass into a continual mass in terms of your audience and everything. And I think I've seen a lot of artists from here, like, you know, get put up on a platform and, you know, and they're just like, yeah, finally got added to this station, finally got a playlist, finally got, you know, praise here. And it's like, you know, finally got some media coverage. But how do you actually translate that into ongoing, you know, support from the communities that you're trying to develop, if that makes any sense? Because yeah, I don't know. I think it's sad because it's a lot of artists, when they get to that moment, they feel very burnt out, and they're just like, it doesn't really feel like a moment for them. It feels like they're in the passenger seat of their own career or something, because they don't necessarily have the right infrastructure, or they haven't had the ability to seize upon a moment of critical mass, and then apparently that's the only time you get it, you know? So yeah.
So yeah, I guess to your point, once artists have those opportunities and those platforms, it's also about sustaining it. So there's like long-term investment, not only in the artist, but also in that community and so on and so forth. So that way it just doesn't feel performative from said platform. Is that right?
Yeah, no, it does. Yeah, I think also I guess the awareness of, you know, not that there can really be an awareness between platforms and, let's say, label infrastructure, management infrastructure, for them to know, okay, cool, we gave them all of this. Is this actually going to, you know, enable them to go the next mile? It's the same reason why TikTok or someone might put your song up front, because if they don't do it just to, you'd like to think that they wouldn't just do it. Maybe it is. I don't know. Why they just put it just for show. But ideally, in the way that they position it is, they put it on they play the list up the front, so heaps of people will use it, and then hopefully everyone uses it, and it goes off, and they want to be responsible for it, if that makes any sense.
I agree, but also to play devil's advocate.
Please do.
I guess in an ideal world that's how it would play out, but then I also see moments like Pride, and that's when these platforms will celebrate these queer artists, but never again, or International Women's Day, or any of these kind of peak social conversational moments. It's like, we'll platform these artists, and then every other day of the year, it's silent.
Even then, minimizing harm as well is very, even through the Black Lives Matter movement, there was that flash of we're going to take down all these things with the N-word in it, and
or even everyone posting their little black square, the black square, and then I was like, yeah, cool, but you just fired 3 execs last week and being racist.
I know, because I watched people post it, and I was like, it's not like I thought I was going to go into work the next day and have a good day, but I was extra angry about it. I was like, why is this still happening? Why am I still being ignored? Why is it you all posted a black tile?
Posted it Tuesday, come Wednesday, back to normal.
Nothing. Nada.
Yeah, so I guess, moments like that really make me question what change is really happening. Because I think there's a lot of... one, Australia loves to import race politics, especially US race politics, but won't address what's happening in these lands. And then second to that, because of the global conversation around Me Too or Black Lives Matter, so on and so forth, now organizations here get real shaky, and they're like, yeah, but we got to do an acknowledgement. But yet you don't have any First Nations people on your board. So what's that about? Stop doing acknowledgements of countries.
So this all seems like a lot of work by the sounds of it. So how long do we think it will take to do this?
Rebuilding also will be dependent on the evolution and adaptation of the ever-changing landscape, if that makes sense. So, I feel like it's not going to be about the destination, but more so about the journey, and I guess what happens over the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years, and how we, in those moments, best respond. Well, not the current, but the environment then, if that makes sense.
Be ready is sort of what you're saying.
Yeah, because I think we all very capable and very equipped to learn, to grow, to absorb, to unlearn as well. I think just a lot of people choose not to.
I think that in the concept, yes, to all of that, but also there are, I feel like in many industries, people are just like, well, it's always about, the journey, and then it's just a great reason to, kind of not do anything, it's an ongoing conversation. Yeah. And there can be things done, because it does need to be, a drastic rebuild, and, some of those things, some people talk about codes of conduct. Some people talk about whether, because the music industry, not everyone is employed, there's lots of freelancers, lots of sole traders and everything like that, whether there's a devolved version of I don't know, a tribunal or something that could administer any types of disputes or anything like that don't really fall within the realms of corporate structures. Not everyone's super lucky to work at really big organizations. I don't know what the efficacy of a code of conduct or something like that might be, but there should be, or some people even talk about unionization of certain things, but I don't know, it might be, don't know exactly what that would look like, given that not everyone is an employee, has to say, and everything like that.
Even then, the union thing that you raised is a really interesting point, because isn't the MEAA the industry for musicians, and then they had to be sort of prodded into action when the pandemic actually even started.
I have kind of the only reason that I ever deal with them is to ask them to get visas for overseas international artists, and I send them. I mean, I'm sorry if that person is watching this, but I send them $60 for every application, and they tell them that. Yeah, it was 60.
You didn't ripped off it.
Oh, maybe the rates have changed.
Are you a member?
No, I'm not a member, but essentially.
off track, I think.
Yeah, but essentially, I think a lot of people have very limited contact with them. I think maybe they started out with the remit mostly to help like stagehands and like theatre people and everything like that, not really musicians as such, or maybe like musicians in touring bands and stuff like that. But I think the industry has evolved since then. There are some unions that are sort of popping up in the States which reflect membership to a specific label or something like that.
Did you say in the States?
Yeah, so there was a new union for Secretly Group called Secretly Group Union, which is a group of indie labels, but that's more so still specifically to someone's workplace, if that makes any sense. So I think there are things that, can make us actually feel more like an industry rather than a bunch of dangling arms being like, oh yeah, like, no one actually really feels like they work in the industry up until they get like a full-time job at, a big organization, even like half the organizations that you go get a full-time job and you still really don't feel like a person. So I feel like there can be some more, just to make it feel like you're actually a working person in music.
I mean,
to be completely transparent, I would say that, I'm sure some of my actions and behaviors, 5 to 10 years ago definitely would have been called into question if we were using today's, like kind of lens over, things back then. So then also with that same idea in our heads, can that also be applied when we look to the future, when we think about rebuilding, when we think about change? Can the same kind of mechanics apply in
like
the same way?
Making the model almost like it's a model, like it's not just meant to be representative of a specific time.
Yeah.
I think language itself is temporary and evolving. So, and I think it's like the change will hopefully consistently evolve and get better as you move through more of the issues. That's what I've certainly noticed in my own kind of understanding within my community. And, take, like, decolonize, I sometimes think that's going to become the next reconciliation, isn't it? Is it going to be appropriated so much, like it already is? Is it going to be that? So there's also those things.
Decolonizing my fridge.
Sure.
Like, what are you talking about?
What does that mean? So I think,
Decolonize Day in 20 years' time, where we do everything but decolonize.
We'll have a cupcake. A decolonization cupcake.
And that's how you decolonize. You have a cupcake and a cup of tea. Executives in the large companies, they have capital and they also have cultural capital behind them. How can we encourage them to, to actually make change rather than either waiting for it to happen or waiting for a moment to be to come and sweep them along? How can we encourage them to be proactive and to make the change that we need to see to make artists feel safer and to make it more inclusive, I guess, the music industry? My
experience with some of my clients and some of the hairy moments I've had in the past, I've always come back to this idea of your experience becomes your truth. And I think that a lot of the times executives in these kind of like these people in these executive positions, because they don't, their inner circle is people that look like them, that have very similar experiences. They, a lot of the times would like to believe that they're absolved from any responsibility because it's, this stuff can't be happening in my company. And my company wouldn't be doing this harmful stuff because we're better than that. And, I think pride and ego quickly...
Pride and ego might even be giving them too much credit.
Maybe, most likely. But I feel like, pride and ego definitely plays its part in that. I think a lot of the time, I've always found that it's been really important to kind of, again, going back to what I was talking about earlier about imagining and dreaming with people, I've always believed that it's required a two-pronged approach. I think, grassroots as well as a top-down approach has been super important to this work and through this learning together, but ultimately kind of demonstrating the ways in which this important work can be really beneficial on a cultural level, social level, environmental, structural, but also I think taking it a step further and seeing, once we're in these spaces, or at least for myself, through my experience, what kind of work can be done that is also framing the work in a way that's also palatable, that's also going to bring, commercial...
Like get them to the table and
and it may not always be really constructive to the situation, but it's about, I use the word finesse a lot in my crew, but, sometimes I've had to, finesse the situation in order to get them to the table to understand exactly what the experience is, what, the situation is, and how we can work through this together. Otherwise, you're going to have some serious problems on your hands.
I mean, do you think the issue is still getting them to come to the table, or do you think that they're better, but it's in the community, actually holding them accountable or whatever?
Through some of the conversations I've been having during the pandemic, people are more willing now to have people are more willing now to come to the table. I do suspect that a lot of the time it's out of fear.
Yeah, and I think that's really important because, so imagine situation, I'm young manager, let's say you're big short executive from Momo, and I'm just here are my concerns, and then you're just I love all different types of people. I'm inclusive, and I don't think that I am discriminatory. That's that's as far as the conversation is really going. Not going, but I think it is out of fear, and I think that a lot of people get really defensive about their own. I'm sure maybe there's some executives that on I don't know. We can get into that unconscious racism, blah blah blah. But it's more so that they're getting super defensive over their own specific personal actions or what they've had oversight over, etc. etc. Yeah. I think rather than listening obviously and being okay, well, what do you think is hard for you? What do you think? And getting into the specifics of that rather than getting buried in language, if that makes sense. Because I feel a lot of people get, a lot of people in senior roles at levels, they'll just nod and they'll be yep, I'm inclusive, I'm here for everyone.
But you know what's wild is that a lot of the times people don't even know what these words mean.
Yeah, I know. That's why they're nodding along because they're scared.
When they're I'm being accountable. I'm accountability is a process, babes. It's not a destination point. You step into a process of accountability. So, I think, a lot of the times people don't even know what these words mean.
And then it's nodding along, and I think that's, I think it is, sure, it can be scary to anyone, but I think that a part of that is sort of reconciling your fear with being, humble and, true humility, which I think really plays into that element of, pride and ego getting in the way of cultural change. So I think if there's a bit more humility when people come to the table in terms of just, not minimizing experiences. I'm sure that there's been plenty of times where you're just this set of experiences happened, and then someone just nodded and said, yeah, that sucks, and then they go and talk to 4 other of their friends who look exactly the same as them, and they threw a hissing fit over this thing, and I'm just and completely minimize the experience because based on their experience, that's apparently meaningless, if that makes sense.
And then also the immediate circle of people who they surround themselves
Absolutely,
with. Absolutely,
who they go for advice, or do you think that this is a problem, or how would you deal with the situation? It's well, you're not in the capacity to deal in that situation. So, I don't know. I think it is very much changing that, fear into humility, being I don't understand what that word you said meant. I don't understand what decolonization means. Please tell me.
It's also really classist, even in our own,
totally
anticipating the question. Where are we going in the future, and what are you looking forward to in the future? What do you have hope for? And I guess I think that's probably the best way to put it. Where is your hope lying at the moment for the future of the industry now that we have an opportunity to rebuild?
I think in my experience, I've really seen the power in taking a step back and letting young people really take the charge. I'm a young person myself, but you know, I look to my younger siblings a lot. And I also think about, you know, the cultural community development work, workshop programming, skills development programming that, you know, I've been so fortunate to do in community where, you know, you see these young people with such ambition and drive and, you know, hope, and they're incredibly smart, and what they're able to bring to the table is, you know, a lot of times something that's, you know, older folk, you know, I think over time may have lost. I'm really looking forward to, you know, working alongside young people in this industry to help foster that talent, so that way they also are able to come up with me, and those pathways can be accessed, and that work can continue beyond me, because the work is bigger than me and will continue to be. So I guess that's what I'm hopeful for. I'm hopeful for change. I'm hopeful for rebuilding, unification. Of course, I think that goes without saying. But in terms of my contributions here and now and the people I can, you know, partner and work alongside, I'm really thrilled and excited to work in this space, you know, championing young people, creative excellence in minority communities, and that working in community, I think it's so important.
It's a similar, like, young people, and I look to the young people of Digi Youth Arts and the learnings and the teachings and the access to cultural knowledges that not all of us have always had, and, you know, some have. That's the way the colonies played out. And I just think about what they're going to do in 10 years, and I think that's really exciting. Because I was like, whoa, like, I know they joke that they're all becoming like baby Aletheas, and I'm like, what are they going to do? Like, and, you know, it is, and I've said this before, they're going to reclaim space in ways that we can't imagine yet. And I think that's, the future is exciting, and I think that people in the sector will have to choose, like, and I hope that they choose the side of love and revolution that's going to lead to a much better time for everyone. And I hope that, you know, I would actually love them to mobilise as quickly as they have the past 12 months for all these issues that we've been talking about for a long time.
I don't know whether mine is like a hope and a goal. I guess it's a hope/goal. But I think it's really important for artists from minority communities and also artists that the pressure of I guess like ongoing content is alleviated from artists. I think that you know, obviously there's different channels of communication, and I think a lot of young artists have really championed ways that can be you know, a part of their practice, but that doesn't necessarily mean it has to be a part of every single artist's practice. And I think that we're kind of getting to a point where if you're not creating content that is not your practice constantly, then you know, people that essentially give money aren't interested anymore. And I think that's a really dangerous proposition, because if you sort of, you know, because that's maybe the only form of, you know, staying relevant or staying competitive or anything like that, it's not, you know, it doesn't mean that it might not hit, you know, or resonate with someone. It might not be important culturally or something like that. So, and I also think that, you know, I think broadly, like, that does apply to all artists, because it's just like an incredible drain on mental health. Essentially, you know, this isn't what artists signed up for. Yes, there's a part of marketing your art, but when it becomes the majority of what you're doing, it's sort of just like, this isn't what they signed up for in terms of being artists and everything like that. But I think specifically for marginalized artists, the ability, the capital needed, the you know, even literally just the physical act of doing it so often and everything like that, when they might have jobs to go to, when there might be just limits on time, etc., etc. I just hope that, you know, in this moment of slowing down and, you know, everyone kind of taking a step back, we can kind of especially take the pressure off our needs to deliver content constantly.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, I think that's it for now.